I'm Rachel Matthews, 32 years old, and until recently, I was a dedicated marketing specialist at Horizon Media. For 5 years, I poured my heart and soul into that company, often working 60-hour weeks, while my colleague Brian Thompson barely managed the minimum. I was certain the senior marketing director position would be mine, everyone said so. Then came the announcement that shattered my world and taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. But before I tell you how my world collapsed, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories about workplace justice that will make your jaw drop. I still remember the day I walked into Horizon Media's Glass and Steel headquarters for my interview, MBA from the University of Michigan fresh in hand and dreams bigger than the Chicago skyline. I was ready to conquer the marketing world. The interview went brilliantly, and when they offered me an entry-level marketing coordinator position, I accepted on the spot. Despite the modest salary, I knew this company had potential for growth, and I was determined to climb the ladder. From day one, I established myself as someone management could count on. While other new hires watched the clock for quitting time, I was the first one in and the last one out. My desk lamp was often the only one still illuminating our office floor long after everyone else had gone home. Not because I was inefficient, but because I wanted to deliver excellence in everything I touched. By my second year, I had been promoted to marketing specialist. My campaigns consistently outperformed projections. The Riverside Hotel chain campaign I developed increased their bookings by 37% in just one quarter. The Nutri-Life rebrand I spearheaded helped them capture an entirely new demographic, boosting their sales by over 40%. These weren't just good results. They were exceptional, and the numbers proved it. Sandra Miller, the senior marketing director and my mentor, took notice early on. A formidable woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the sharpest mind I'd ever encountered, she began inviting me to client meetings that would normally be reserved for more senior staff. "You have raw talent, Rachel," she told me over coffee one morning. "But more importantly, you have work ethic and integrity. That combination is rare and valuable." Sandra became my guide through the corporate landscape, teaching me not just about marketing strategies, but about navigating office politics. When she announced her retirement plans, she pulled me aside. "I've spoken to David about you," she said, referring to David Wilson, our marketing department head. "The senior director position will open when I leave. You should apply. You're ready." For the next 3 months, I prepared meticulously. I created a comprehensive portfolio showcasing my best campaigns. I took an advanced course in digital marketing strategies to ensure my skills were cutting edge. I practiced my presentation skills at Toastmasters every Tuesday night. I even bought books on leadership and management, highlighting and annotating key passages during my morning commute. The interview with David went even better than I had hoped. He seemed genuinely impressed with my portfolio and the 5-year growth strategy one had prepared specifically for the interview. "This is excellent work, Rachel," he said, leafing through my presentation. "Very thorough, very forward-thinking." When I left his office, my colleagues Jessica Parker and Thomas Reynolds were waiting eagerly. "How did it go?" Jessica asked, practically bouncing with excitement. "I think it went really well," I replied, trying to contain my own optimism. "Please," Thomas scoffed good-naturedly. "Everyone knows the job is already yours. David would be insane to pick anyone else." That night, I went shopping for the perfect outfit to wear on announcement day. I settled on a navy blue suit that projected confidence and professionalism. As I stood in front of the mirror at the boutique, I allowed myself to imagine hearing David say the words, "Our new senior marketing director is Rachel Matthews." I was ready. I had earned this. Brian Thompson joined Horizon Media about a year after I did. While I had earned my position through hard work and proven results, Brian seemed to have been hired primarily for his charisma and connections. The son of a well-known advertising executive, Brian had an air of entitlement that was immediately apparent from his first day. Brian established a pattern of doing the absolute minimum required. He regularly arrived at 9:30 a.m. for our 8:30 a.m. start time, always armed with elaborate excuses involving traffic or train delays, despite living closer to the office than most of us. He took extended lunch breaks, often returning with a lingering scent of alcohol. He was typically the first one out the door at 5 p.m. sharp. Working hard or hardly working became his personal catchphrase, delivered with a wink that somehow charmed management while irritating everyone who actually carried his slack. What Brian lacked in work ethic, he made up for with charm. However, he made up for it in political savvy. He had an uncanny ability to appear whenever the executive team was around, materializing with coffee and conversation just as the CEO walked through. He remembered personal details about everyone in management, asking about their children's soccer games or their wives' charity events. He laughed at all of David's jokes, no matter how stale, and always had sports statistics ready for the Monday morning discussions about weekend games. Initially, I didn't consider Brian competition. While we held the same title of marketing specialist, we operated in different realms. I was focused on delivering results. He was focused on delivering compliments. The first time I had to cover for Brian was 6 months after he started. We were partnered on the Franklin Sports account, with Brian responsible for the social media strategy while I handled traditional media. The day before our presentation, Brian casually mentioned he might need some help polishing his section. What I discovered was that he hadn't even started. No strategy document, no content calendar, not even basic research on the client's existing social presence. I stayed until midnight creating a comprehensive social media plan from scratch, which Brian then presented as his own work, making direct eye contact with me as he took credit for specific ideas I had developed hours earlier. This became a pattern. For the Lakeside Mall campaign, Brian was supposed to conduct customer surveys and compile the data. When the deadline approached, with no updates from him, I discreetly completed the work myself rather than risk the project's failure. For the Green Life Organics launch, Brian was assigned the competitive analysis but produced only 3 superficial paragraphs. I rewrote it entirely, expanding it to 15 pages of detailed insights. Each time, I told myself I was being a team player, that the work reflected on all of us, and that eventually, merit would be recognized. The first real warning sign came 3 weeks before Sandra's retirement. I was grabbing lunch at the cafe across from our building when I spotted Brian and David sitting in a corner booth, deep in conversation. This wasn't unusual on its own, but what caught my attention was the intensity of their discussion and the way David clapped Brian on the shoulder as they left, a gesture of familiarity I'd never seen him extend to any other employee. "I saw Brian and David having lunch today," I mentioned casually to Sandra the next morning. "David meets with lots of team members," she reassured me. "And trust me, he knows exactly who does the real work around here." Still, something felt off. In the following days, I noticed small changes. Brian began attending meetings he'd previously skipped. He started keeping regular hours, arriving promptly at 8:30. Most concerning, he began asking detailed questions about my projects. "Just trying to learn from the best," he said with that trademark smile. When I questioned his sudden interest a week before the promotion announcement, the entire marketing department went to dinner at Lame One, an upscale French restaurant downtown. The evening was meant to be a celebration of Sandra's career, but Brian seemed unusually jubilant, ordering expensive champagne and making repeated toasts. As the night wound down, I overheard him telling Jessica, "Big change is coming. You'll see." That night, I barely slept. For the first time, a sliver of doubt crept into my mind. I tried to dismiss it, reminding myself of all the reasons I deserved the promotion. But Brian's confidence had planted a seed of uncertainty that would soon grow into something much darker. The morning of the announcement, I arrived at the office at 7:15 a.m., earlier than usual. I wanted time to compose myself, to review my notes for the first senior team meeting where I would present my vision for the department. My navy blue suit felt powerful, professional. I had even treated myself to a blowout at the salon the evening before. Our conference room filled quickly. Sandra sat near the front, giving me an encouraging smile. Brian arrived last, naturally, wearing a new suit I hadn't seen before. He caught my eye and gave me a strange smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. At exactly 9 a.m., David entered the room. The CEO, Margaret Jackson, followed behind him, which wasn't part of the plan as far as I knew. My stomach tightened. Executive presence usually meant bigger announcements. "Good morning, everyone," David began, his voice carrying across the now silent room. As you all know, today marks a significant transition for our team. After 15 incredible years, we're saying goodbye to Sandra Miller as our Senior Marketing Director. Applause filled the room as Sandra nodded graciously. Sandra leaves behind enormous shoes to fill, David continued. We conducted an extensive review of internal candidates, looking for someone who embodies the leadership qualities, creative thinking, and cultural fit that Horizon Media values. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I subtly straightened my posture, ready to stand when my name was called. I'm delighted to announce that our new Senior Marketing Director will be. David paused for dramatic effect. Brian Thompson. The room erupted in applause again, but it sounded distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. My vision narrowed to a pinpoint, focused on David's face, searching for some sign that this was a mistake. But his broad smile confirmed the unthinkable reality. Brian rose, straightening his tie, and made his way to the front of the room. I felt frozen, my body refusing to process what my mind already knew. Somehow, I managed to force my lips into what I hoped resembled a smile, even as my chest constricted painfully. Thank you, David. Margaret, Brian began, his voice smooth as silk. I'm honored and humbled by this opportunity. I've learned so much from everyone in this room, especially Sandra. He turned toward me. And Rachel, I couldn't have done this without you. Your dedication has been an inspiration. The audacity of his statement nearly broke my composure. Couldn't have done this without me? He had done almost nothing, yet here he stood, being rewarded for work I had completed, for late nights I had endured, for ideas I had generated. As the meeting concluded, colleagues approached to congratulate Brian. A few stopped by my desk with puzzled expressions, murmuring quietly that they had been certain the position would be mine. I maintained my professional mask, thanking them for their support while assuring them I was just fine. The moment the last well-wisher left, I made a beeline for the restroom, locking myself in the furthest stall. Only then did I allow the tears to fall, silent and hot against my cheeks. Questions raced through my mind. What had I done wrong? What did Brian have that I didn't? How could years of proven excellence lose out to charm and connections? After composing myself, I returned to find Sandra waiting at my desk, her face a mixture of shock and indignation. This isn't right, she said quietly. Everyone knows you deserve that position. Apparently not everyone, I replied, attempting a weak smile. I'm going to speak with David. Sandra insisted. This decision makes no sense. Please don't, I said quickly. I need to understand this myself first, but thank you, Sandra. It means a lot that you believe in me. As she walked away, I opened my computer and tried to focus on work, but the words blurred before my eyes. The promotion I had worked toward for years, the recognition I had earned through countless late nights and successful campaigns, had been handed to someone else, someone who had never demonstrated even a fraction of my commitment or capability. The betrayal cut deep, but I had no idea that this was merely the beginning of a situation that would grow increasingly unbearable. The following Monday, I requested a meeting with David. I needed feedback. I needed to understand where I had fallen short. Professional development, I told myself. A learning opportunity. In reality, I was searching for any explanation that might make sense of the incomprehensible. David's assistant scheduled me for a 15-minute slot between meetings, which was telling in itself. When I entered his office, David barely looked up from his computer. Rachel, have a seat. What can I do for you? I took a deep breath, determined to maintain my professionalism. I wanted to get your feedback on my candidacy for the senior director position. I'd appreciate understanding where I fell short so I can focus my development efforts. David finally looked at me, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. You're an excellent performer, Rachel. Your technical skills are strong. I waited for more, but he seemed to consider this adequate feedback. I understand that, I pressed gently. But I'd like to know specifically why Brian was selected instead. What qualities or skills did he demonstrate that made him a better fit? David's expression tightened slightly. It came down to cultural fit and leadership qualities. Brian has a natural ability to connect with people at all levels. He thinks big picture. The executive team felt he was ready to step into a more strategic role. Every word felt like a slap. Cultural fit? I had built relationships throughout the company. Leadership qualities? I had successfully led multiple teams and mentored junior staff. Big picture thinking? My 5-year strategy had been praised by David himself. I had managed projects, and my track record of successful campaigns spoke for itself, along with consistently positive client feedback and my detailed growth strategy presentation. These weren't factors to be overlooked, of course. David, however, dismissed them. "This wasn't an easy decision, Rachel," he said. "But we need to move forward now. Brian will be counting on your support during this transition." As I left David's office, I spotted Brian in the conference room presenting to the creative team. Through the glass wall, I could see him gesturing to slides that looked eerily familiar. With a sinking feeling, I realized he was using my strategic framework, the very one I had developed for my interview. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Brian would call me into his new corner office, ask for my input on projects, and then present my ideas as his own in executive meetings. I was no longer invited to attend. Work I had initiated was suddenly collaborative, with Brian's name listed first on all documentation. The workload shifted as well. Brian began delegating his responsibilities to me, claiming he needed to focus on higher-level strategic initiatives. In practice, this meant I was now doing my job, and half of his, while he attended long lunches with executives and spent hours closed in his office on personal calls. "Can you just clean up this presentation for tomorrow's client meeting?" became his standard request at 4:45 p.m. Cleanup invariably meant completely rebuilding inadequate work or creating entire sections from scratch. My colleagues saw what was happening. Jessica stopped by my desk one evening as I was finishing a report Brian had dumped on me an hour before deadline. "This isn't right, Rachel," she said quietly. "Everyone knows you're doing all the work while he takes the credit." "What can I do?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. "Document everything," suggested Thomas, who had joined us. "Every email, every request, every instance of him taking credit. You never know when you might need it." I took their advice, creating a detailed log of all the work I completed that Brian claimed as his own. I saved emails, screenshots, earlier versions of documents with my original ideas. It became a second job, this careful documentation of injustice. Sandra called me regularly after her retirement, and during one particularly difficult week, she suggested I meet with her for dinner. "You look exhausted," she said when I arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes late, after finishing a project Brian had forgotten about. "I'm fine," I insisted, though we both knew it wasn't true. Dark circles had taken permanent residence under my eyes. I had lost weight, my suits hanging loose where they once fit perfectly. "No, you're not," Sandra said firmly. "And you need to consider whether this situation is sustainable." The truth was, it wasn't just my professional life suffering. My personal life had begun to unravel as well. I had canceled dinner plans with my boyfriend, Mike, 3 times in the past month. When we did see each other, I was distracted, mentally cataloging all the tasks waiting for me at the office. "You're not really here," Mike had said during our last date. "You haven't been really here in months." He was right. I was physically present, but mentally trapped in an endless cycle of work, resentment, and increasing anxiety. I had started waking at 3 a.m., my mind racing with all the ways I was being taken advantage of, but unable to see a way out. The situation reached a breaking point 6 weeks after Brian's promotion. We were preparing for a major presentation to Nutrilite, one of our biggest clients. I had spent weeks researching market trends, developing creative concepts, and building comprehensive slides. Brian had contributed exactly nothing, despite being officially in charge of the account. The morning of the presentation, Brian asked me to walk him through all the material, just to make sure we're aligned. For 2 hours, I explained every slide, every strategy point, every data insight. He nodded, asked a few questions, and then, with a smile, praised me for my thoroughness. "Great job putting this together," he said. "But I'll handle the actual presentation. The client is expecting to hear from the senior director." I sat silently at the back of the room as Brian presented my work, word for word. When the Nutrilite CEO specifically praised the competitive analysis section, saying it was the most insightful market breakdown they'd seen, Brian smiled broadly. "Thank you," he said. "I really focused on digging deeper than the surface numbers on that section." I had stayed until 2 a.m. 3 nights in a row creating that analysis. After the meeting, as the clients filed out, I overheard the Nutri-Life marketing manager say to Brian, "Your team is lucky to have such a visionary leader." Later that afternoon, I was returning from the break room when I heard Brian's voice from David's office door, slightly ajar. "Rachel's been struggling with the increased responsibilities," Brian said. "I've had to redo a lot of her work lately. Might be time to consider whether she's the right fit for her current role." The mug of coffee slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Hot liquid splashed my legs, but I barely felt it. Brian was not only stealing my work, he was actively undermining me. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the darkened office. Sandra's retirement had removed my last ally. The situation wasn't going to improve. Brian would continue taking credit for my work while simultaneously diminishing my value to the company. Eventually, he might even succeed in having me removed or demoted. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider leaving. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I had given 5 years of my life to Horizon Media. My identity was thoroughly entangled with my role there. Who would I be without this job? I opened my laptop and began researching employment law and company policies. I needed to understand my options. Later that week, I met with my friend Emily, a labor attorney, for confidential advice. "Based on what you've described, you have grounds for a complaint," she explained. "But corporate disputes are messy, even when you're in the right. Have you considered simply moving on?" I had, but something in me resisted the idea of quietly walking away while Brian continued his charade. That weekend, Mike and I went for a long walk along the lakefront. I told him everything, every frustration and ounce of anger I'd been bottling up for months. "You know what I think?" he said after listening patiently. "I think you should start your own agency. You're brilliant at what you do, Rachel. Why waste that talent making someone else look good?" The idea took root, growing stronger each day. I began researching what it would take to launch my own marketing consultancy. I updated my portfolio with campaigns I could legally showcase. I made discreet inquiries to contacts who might become future clients. I drafted my resignation letter, revising it multiple times until it was perfect, professional, concise, with no hint of the turmoil that had prompted it. Except for one crucial final paragraph that would change everything. The client presentation debacle marked a definitive turning point. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. I realized that no amount of hard work or excellence would ever be fairly recognized in an environment where politics trumped performance. Still, I wasn't ready to make any rash decisions. I needed to be strategic, just as I had been with every marketing campaign I had ever developed. The next morning, I arrived early, as usual. The office was quiet, with only the cleaning staff present. I settled at my desk and began making a detailed list of pros and cons for staying versus leaving. Under staying, I struggled to list even 3 points. Under leaving, my pen moved rapidly across the page. Around 10 a.m., Sandra called. Though retired, she remained well-connected with former colleagues and industry contacts. "Rachel, I just heard something you should know," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "A friend on the board mentioned that David has been praising Brian's leadership, specifically citing the Nutri-Life presentation as evidence of his transformative impact on the department." I gripped the phone tighter. "The presentation I created entirely?" "Exactly," Sandra confirmed. "And there's more. They're discussing a substantial bonus for Brian based on the department's performance this quarter, the performance that was largely due to your campaigns, your strategies, your late nights." There was a pause, and then Sandra continued, "I'm not supposed to know this yet, but I'm being honored at the Marketing Excellence Awards next month. I've insisted you be my guest. You deserve to be in that room, Rachel, surrounded by people who recognize true talent." After we hung up, I sat motionless at my desk. The awards ceremony would put me in the same room as the industry's most influential leaders, potential clients, and possibly future employers or investors in a new venture. The seed Mike had planted about starting my own agency suddenly felt less like a fantasy and more like a viable escape route. That afternoon, Brian called me into his office. A client was unhappy with a campaign concept his team had presented, and he needed a completely new approach by morning. "I'd do it myself," he said, not even attempting to sound sincere, "but I have dinner with David and the executive team tonight." Real shame about the timing. As I gathered the files, he added casually, "Oh, and I'll need you to come in this weekend to prepare for the quarterly review. I want to present some fresh ideas to the board." I nodded automatically, then paused at the door. "Brian," I said, "just out of curiosity, do you ever feel bad about taking credit for other people's work?" He looked up, genuinely surprised by the question. "That's business, Rachel. Everyone does it. If you were smarter about office politics, maybe you'd be the one with the corner office." He shrugged. "No hard feelings, though. You're great at the execution stuff." The execution stuff, as if strategy, creativity, and innovation were somehow lesser skills than schmoozing executives. I returned to my desk and opened my personal email, clicking on a message I had received earlier from a former client who had started her own company. She was looking for marketing support and had reached out to see if I could recommend anyone, or, better yet, she wrote, "If you ever decide to leave Horizon, I'd hire you in a heartbeat." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I opened a new document and began drafting a business plan for my own marketing consultancy. That evening, I stayed late completing Brian's urgent project, but something had changed. I was no longer doing it for approval or recognition. I was doing it as the final act in a chapter that was about to close. When I arrived home after 10 p.m., Mike was waiting with takeout and a sympathetic ear. I showed him the business plan I'd started. "This is really good, Rachel," he said, reviewing my notes. "You've got the expertise, the client relationships, the creative vision. What's stopping you?" "Fear," I admitted. "What if I fail?" "What if you fly?" he countered. "And, honestly, how much worse would failing on your own terms be compared to what you're experiencing now?" He had a point. The following day, I contacted Emily again for legal advice about starting my own agency. I needed to understand my non-compete obligations and client solicitation restrictions. As it turned out, Horizon's employment contract had several vulnerabilities that a good lawyer could work with. I also scheduled a meeting with a small business advisor at my bank to discuss financing options. Between my savings and a potential small business loan, I could sustain myself for at least 6 months while building a client base. Each step I took toward independence lightened the weight I'd been carrying. Each concrete plan made leaving seem less frightening and more exciting. The final catalyst came when Sandra forwarded me an industry newsletter featuring an interview with Brian. He was quoted extensively about the innovative strategy behind the Nutri-Life campaign, my strategy, described in my words, without a single mention of my contribution. That night, I finalized my resignation letter. The main body was professional and benign, expressing gratitude for the opportunities I'd had at Horizon and wishing the company continued success. It was the kind of resignation letter that would burn no bridges and generate no suspicion. But the final paragraph was different. The final paragraph contained the truth, carefully documented and impossible to dismiss. The final paragraph would ensure that, while I might be leaving, justice would remain. I slept better that night than I had in months, secure in my decision and ready for whatever came next. I chose a Tuesday for my resignation. Mondays were always chaotic, and I wanted David's full attention. I arrived at the office dressed in one of my best suits, a sleek black ensemble that always gave me confidence. I brought a small box for my personal items, though I planned to collect most of them later, after the dust had settled. My resignation letter was printed on high-quality paper and sealed in an envelope. The regular letter was brief and professional, but the attachment contained meticulously organized evidence. Screenshots of emails where Brian directly asked me to complete his assigned work. Side-by-side comparisons of my original documents and his revised versions that were identical except for the name change. Testimonials from clients specifically praising elements I had created. Time-stamped records showing I was in the office working late while Brian was out socializing with executives. At precisely 10 a.m., I knocked on David's door. "Rachel, come in," he said, barely glancing up from his computer. "Make it quick, though. I have a call with the Chicago office in 15 minutes. I remained standing, placing the envelope on his desk. "This is my formal resignation. I'll be leaving Horizon Media, effective 2 weeks from today." That got his attention. David looked up, his expression more annoyed than concerned. Resignation? Is this about the promotion? Because that's water under the bridge now, Rachel. We need to move forward as a team. It's about several things, I replied evenly, all of which are outlined in my letter. David opened the envelope, skimming the main letter with a dismissive expression. He actually chuckled, a short, condescending sound that made my spine stiffen. Well, if you feel you need to move on, we certainly won't stand in your way. Though I think you're making a hasty decision. Brian speaks highly of your execution skills. There it was again, execution skills, as if I were merely an implementation drone, rather than the strategic mind behind our most successful campaigns. There's an attachment you should review as well, I said quietly. David flipped to the next page, then the next. His expression transformed from casual dismissal to confusion, and then to something approaching alarm. He flipped through the documentation more rapidly now, his face gradually draining of color as he absorbed the evidence before him. When he reached the final page, which stated that copies of all documentation had been forwarded to the board of directors and the Human Resources Department, he looked up sharply. "Is this some kind of joke?" he demanded, his voice strained. I shook my head. No joke. Just facts. Everything in that file is true and verifiable. David stood abruptly. This is completely inappropriate. You can't just send accusations like this to the board without going through proper channels. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. The company whistleblower policy specifically states that employees may report ethical concerns directly to the board if they involve senior management. As department head, you qualify as senior management. He began pacing behind his desk. This is about the promotion, isn't it? You're angry you didn't get the job, so you're trying to sabotage Brian's position. That's petty and unprofessional, Rachel. This is about integrity, I corrected him. About recognizing the actual work behind the results Horizon claims to value. If the company truly believes in meritocracy, they should know who's really responsible for the successes being attributed to others, I said, my voice steady. David changed tactics, his tone suddenly conciliatory. Look, Rachel, let's discuss this reasonably. What would it take for you to reconsider? A promotion? A raise? Your own office? Nothing, I said simply. My decision is made. At least withdraw the complaint to the board, he pressed. We can handle this internally. There's no need to escalate matters. I met his gaze steadily. The board already has the documentation. So does HR. This isn't a negotiation, David. It's a goodbye. You realize this burns bridges, he said, his voice hardening again. I have connections throughout this industry. This could affect your future opportunities. I had anticipated this threat. I'm not concerned. The marketing community is smaller than you think, and word travels fast about who really does the work. Sandra has already introduced me to half the creative directors in Chicago. David's face flushed at the mention of Sandra. He had never liked her direct approach or her insistence on recognizing genuine talent over political maneuvering. 2 weeks' notice is standard, I continued, but I'm prepared to leave immediately if you prefer. I've documented all my current projects and created transition notes. He stared at me for a long moment, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he said, clear out your desk today. We'll pay the 2 weeks, but I want you gone by noon. I nodded, having expected this reaction. I'll send an email to the team letting them know. No, David snapped. I'll handle communications about your departure. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Board secretary just walked into HR looking serious. What did you do? I smiled faintly as I closed David's door behind me. The wheels were already in motion. At my desk, I quickly gathered my personal items while responding to confused messages from colleagues who had seen me enter David's office with an envelope and exit looking unusually serene. Leaving for a new opportunity, I wrote in response to their questions. Details coming soon. Brian appeared at my desk as I was unplugging my personal phone charger. Heard a rumor you're quitting, he said, looking more curious than concerned. Finally realized you're not cut out for the big leagues? I regarded him calmly. Actually, Brian, I've simply decided I deserve better than watching someone else take credit for my work. By the way, you might want to prepare for your meeting with the board this afternoon. I hear they have some interesting questions about the Nutri-Life campaign. His smug expression faltered. What are you talking about? You'll find out soon enough, I replied, closing my box of belongings. Good luck explaining all those brilliant strategies you developed. As I walked toward the elevator, I heard my name called. Thomas and Jessica were hurrying toward me, their faces full of questions. Is it true? Jessica asked. You're really leaving? It's time for a new chapter, I confirmed. But where are you going? Thomas pressed. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. I'm going to build something of my own. Something where integrity and actual results matter. Their expressions shifted from confusion to something like admiration. Jessica pulled me into a quick hug. Good for you. Seriously, this place doesn't deserve you. As the elevator doors closed, my phone lit up with more messages from colleagues. News traveled fast. By the time I reached the lobby, I had received 12 texts, including one from Sandra. Board chairman just called me. They're launching a full investigation. Call me. As I stepped outside, the spring air felt fresh and full of possibility. I had taken control of my narrative. I had stood up for my worth. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, without compromising my integrity. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver my home address. As we pulled away from the Horizon Media building, I didn't look back. The first week after leaving Horizon was surprisingly difficult. After 5 years of structured days and clear objectives, the sudden freedom felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I alternated between bursts of productive energy, developing my business plan and website, and moments of paralyzing doubt. Had I made a catastrophic mistake? Would David's industry connections blacklist me? Would I end up depleting my savings and crawling back to corporate life, humbled and desperate? Mike was my rock during this period, reminding me why I had left and helping me focus on the future rather than second-guessing the past. You made the right decision, he would say whenever he caught me spiraling. Now prove to yourself it was the right one by making it successful. 10 days after my departure, I received an unexpected call from Margaret Jackson, Horizon Media's CEO. Rachel, she began without preamble. The board has reviewed your documentation and conducted interviews with several team members. We'd like to meet with you to discuss the situation. I felt a flutter of anxiety. I appreciate the call, Margaret, but I've moved on from Horizon. I'm not interested in participating in an internal investigation at this point. This isn't just about an investigation, she replied. We'd like to discuss your potential return to the company, with significant adjustments to your position and compensation. The offer caught me off guard. I had never expected Horizon to acknowledge the situation, let alone attempt to rectify it. I'm available tomorrow afternoon, I heard myself say. The Horizon Media boardroom felt simultaneously familiar and foreign as I took a seat across from Margaret, the head of HR, and 2 board members. David was conspicuously absent. First, I want to extend our sincere apologies, Margaret began. The evidence you provided, combined with our internal investigation, has revealed serious lapses in management judgment and oversight. The head of HR nodded gravely. We've taken immediate action. Brian Thompson has been demoted and placed on probation. David Wilson has been removed as department head and reassigned to our Cleveland office. I absorbed this information, feeling a complex mix of vindication and lingering frustration. It had taken my resignation to prompt these changes. We'd like to offer you the senior marketing director position, Margaret continued, with a substantial salary increase and a seat on the executive committee. Your work has clearly been instrumental to our success, and we want to properly recognize that moving forward. Part of me was tempted. The position I had worked toward for years was finally being offered, along with the recognition I had craved. But something had fundamentally changed inside me. The past weeks of independence, despite their challenges, had awakened a hunger for something more than even the most prestigious corporate title could satisfy. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, truly. But I've decided to establish my own marketing consultancy. I believe it's where my talents and values will be best utilized. Margaret looked genuinely disappointed. Is there anything we could offer that would change your mind? We're prepared to be quite flexible. I shook my head. My decision isn't about compensation or title. It's about creating an environment where integrity and excellence are intrinsically valued, not just when convenient. As I left the Horizon building for what I knew would be the last time, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The company had acknowledged the injustice, but more importantly, I had acknowledged my own worth. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I established Matthew's marketing consultancy. I secured a small office space in a co-working environment, created professional branding, and began reaching out to contacts. Sandra proved invaluable, connecting me with potential clients and offering guidance on running an independent business. The Marketing Excellence Awards ceremony provided an unexpected turning point. As Sandra's guest, I found myself surrounded by industry leaders curious about my new venture. By the end of the evening, I had 3 potential client meetings scheduled and an invitation to speak at a digital marketing conference. The first 6 months were lean. I took on smaller projects than I had managed at Horizon, working longer hours for less immediate financial reward. But each completed project added to my portfolio and reputation. Each satisfied client led to referrals and expanding opportunities. A significant breakthrough came when Nutrilife's marketing manager, who had left for a larger company, contacted me directly. "I always knew you were the brains behind our campaign," she admitted. "When I heard you'd started your own agency, I immediately thought of you for our new product launch." That project led to others, and gradually, Matthew's marketing consultancy began to thrive. I hired my first employee at the 8-month mark, a talented recent graduate who reminded me of myself 5 years earlier. By the 1-year anniversary of my resignation, I had a team of 4 and a client roster that included 2 companies larger than any I had worked with at Horizon. 18 months after leaving, I attended an industry conference where I unexpectedly encountered Brian. He looked diminished somehow, his once confident swagger replaced by a more subdued demeanor. "Rachel," he acknowledged awkwardly when we found ourselves alone at the coffee station. "I heard your company is doing well." "It is," I confirmed, feeling neither animosity nor satisfaction at his discomfort. "How are things at Horizon?" "Different," he said after a pause. "David's gone completely. The new department head is big on documentation and proper credit for work." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm actually doing my own presentations now." I nodded, unsure what response would be appropriate. In the end, I simply wished him well and moved on, realizing that his opinion, his career, his validation no longer mattered to me. Later that same day, I received a text from Thomas, who still worked at Horizon. Guess who just became the youngest vice president in company history? Jessica Parker. "The new management is actually recognizing talent now. Your resignation changed everything." The knowledge that my actions had created positive change beyond my own career path was profoundly satisfying. By refusing to accept injustice, I had inadvertently cleared the way for others to be recognized on merit rather than politics. As my business continued to grow, I found myself increasingly approached by young professionals seeking advice. They would ask about marketing strategies, of course, but more often, they wanted guidance on navigating workplace challenges similar to what I had experienced. I always emphasized the same core principles: document everything, know your worth, and sometimes the bravest professional decision is walking away from a situation that doesn't value your contribution. The most unexpected outcome of my journey wasn't the successful business or the professional recognition, it was the personal growth. The woman who had once measured her worth by external validation and corporate approval had transformed into someone who trusted her own judgment and valued integrity above advancement. My relationship with Mike deepened as well. The shared experience of building my business revealed our compatibility as partners in ways our previous routine never could. When he proposed 6 months later, it felt like the natural progression of a relationship that had evolved beyond its initial boundaries. Today, as I interview candidates for our expanding team, I often recognize in them the same hunger for recognition and success that once drove me. I make it a point to clearly acknowledge their contributions and create an environment where work is attributed properly and excellence is consistently rewarded. The last candidate of the day reminds me startlingly of myself 3 years ago, eager, talented, perhaps too willing to prove her worth through endless extra hours and self-sacrifice. "What's the most important thing you look for in a workplace?" I ask her. She considers the question carefully. Opportunity for growth, she answers, predictably. I smile. Let me tell you why I believe integrity is equally important. I share a carefully edited version of my experience with her. Your talent deserves recognition. Never settle for less. The journey from that devastating promotion announcement to running my own successful agency taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. True success isn't measured by titles or salaries, but by the courage to stand up for your worth and the integrity to create the environment you deserve, rather than accepting the one offered to you. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to leave a job or a situation that wasn't recognizing your worth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life lessons from the professional world. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away and build something better. Thank you for watching, and may you always know that your true value is non-negotiable.